So this is what I'm worth to my own daughter? $5. I didn't say it out loud, of course. I just smiled as I held the small plastic bracelet in my hand, the kind you'd find hanging near a checkout counter, light as air and just as meaningless. Across the room, everyone was still admiring the diamond ring Emily had just slipped onto Patricia's finger. $20,000, she had said proudly, her voice carrying across the entire dining room like a toast meant to be remembered. The sunlight coming through the tall windows caught the stone perfectly, scattering little fragments of light across the walls. People gasped. Patricia laughed, lifting her hand higher, basking in it. And I sat there, quietly, with my little white box open in my lap. It was Mother's Day. I had worn my best dress, a soft blue one I'd bought years ago when I still believed days like this meant something. I had even curled my hair that morning, taking my time in front of the mirror, telling myself not to expect too much, just to enjoy whatever Emily had planned. She had insisted on hosting this year, said she wanted it to be special. I suppose she was right, just not in the way I imagined. Mom, open yours, she had said, almost as an afterthought, after the applause for Patricia finally faded. Her smile was quick, distracted, already turning back toward her mother-in-law as if the moment with me was something to check off a list. I opened the box slowly. I remember noticing how light it felt. That should have told me everything. Inside was the bracelet. Thin, plastic, pale gold paint already flaking near the clasp. For a second, I thought maybe it was a joke. Something temporary, a placeholder before she handed me something else. But nothing came. Just silence. A few polite glances. Someone cleared their throat. And then the conversation moved on, just like that. I felt the weight of everyone pretending not to notice. I lifted it carefully, turning it between my fingers as if it were something delicate, something precious. It's lovely, I said, my voice steady, even warm. I surprised myself. Emily barely looked at me. I thought you'd like something simple, she replied, already reaching to refill Patricia's champagne glass. Simple. I let the word settle in my chest. For years, I had told myself Emily was just busy, that life had pulled her in different directions, that her distance wasn't intentional. I had made excuses when holidays became shorter, when phone calls became rare, when visits felt rushed. I had convinced myself that love didn't always have to look the way it used to. But sitting there, watching her adjust that diamond ring on Patricia's hand with such care, such pride, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, undeniable click, like a lock finally turning. I looked around the table. Daniel was smiling, nodding along to something Patricia was saying. The others leaned in, engaged, comfortable. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. I wasn't just overlooked. I had been replaced. The bracelet felt colder in my hand now. Cheaper. I slipped it back into the box and closed the lid with a soft click, the sound barely audible beneath the hum of conversation. No one noticed. Of course they didn't. I placed the box beside my plate and reached for my glass of water instead of the wine. My hand was steady. That surprised me too. I took a small sip and let my eyes drift back to Emily. She was laughing now, her head tilted toward Patricia, her expression open, affectionate. The way she used to look at me. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just clarity. Clean and sharp. The kind that leaves no room for denial. And as I sat there, in a room full of people celebrating Mother's Day, I understood for the first time that this wasn't about a ring or a bracelet. It was about value. And I had just been shown exactly where I stood. I left before dessert was served. No one stopped me. I remember standing from the table slowly, smoothing the front of my dress as if that small gesture could restore something that had just been quietly taken from me. Emily was still talking, her voice light and animated, describing the cruise she had booked for Patricia. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean, private balcony, all-inclusive. I paused for a moment, waiting for her to notice me standing there, to say something, anything, but she did not even look in my direction. So I picked up my purse, nodded politely to no one in particular, and walked out of the room. The hallway felt cooler, quieter, real. By the time I reached the front door, I could still hear the laughter behind me, soft and distant, like something that no longer belonged to me. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind of late spring afternoon that usually felt full of promise. I stood on the porch for a second longer than necessary, letting the silence settle around me. Then I got into my car and closed the door gently. I did not cry. That surprised me the most. Instead, I just sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead as if I needed a moment to remember how to move forward. The drive home was quiet. No music, no radio, just the steady hum of the engine and the rhythm of my own breathing. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me the same way it always had, still, patient, unchanged. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender and old wood wrapping around me like something honest. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and placed the small white box beside it. For a while, I just stood there, looking at it. Then I opened it again. The bracelet looked even smaller under the kitchen light. I picked it up and held it against my wrist, turning it slightly. The plastic caught the light in a dull, uneven way, nothing like the diamond I had seen earlier. I let out a slow breath and set it back down. My eyes drifted across the kitchen, landing on the small things I had collected over the years. The ceramic bowl Emily made in elementary school, slightly crooked but still intact. The framed photo of her at 10 years old, missing her front tooth, smiling like the world was simple and kind. I walked over and picked up the frame, running my thumb gently across the glass. There was a time when she would have made me a card by hand, when she would have hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, when I did not have to wonder where I stood in her life. I placed the frame back down carefully. Memory has a way of softening the edges of things, but not today. Today, everything felt sharp. I moved to the sink and filled a glass with water, taking a slow sip as I stared out the window into the backyard. The garden needed tending. The roses had started to bloom, just like they always did this time of year. Some things, at least, still followed their natural course. I leaned my hands against the counter and let my thoughts settle. For years, I had helped Emily in ways that felt invisible now. I paid for her college tuition when scholarships fell short. I helped with the down payment on her first home, telling myself it was what any mother would do. I even co-signed a small account for her when she and Daniel were starting out, just to make things easier. I never kept track. I never needed to. Love, I had believed, was not something you measured. But standing there in my quiet kitchen, I found myself thinking about numbers for the first time in a very long time. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the living room and pulled open the top drawer. Inside were folders, neatly labeled, organized the way I had always kept things. I hesitated for just a second, my fingers resting on the edge of the drawer. Then I reached in and pulled out one of the folders. The paper felt heavier than I remembered. I carried it back to the table and sat down, opening it slowly. Bank statements, old agreements, documents I had not looked at in years because I trusted that I did not need to. I flipped through them carefully, line by line, my eyes adjusting to the details I had once ignored. Transfers, signatures, dates. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed a pattern. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Always spaced out, always subtle. My fingers paused on one line, then another. I leaned in closer, reading more carefully now. The room was completely silent except for the soft sound of paper turning. I did not feel panic. I did not feel anger. Just that same quiet click from earlier, growing clearer, louder. I sat back in my chair and let the realization settle into place. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not distance or busyness or life getting in the way. This was something else entirely. I closed the folder gently and placed my hands flat on the table, staring at the grain of the wood as if it might offer me an answer. It did not, but I no longer needed one. I knew exactly what I was looking at now, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself a small, calm smile. Not because anything felt good, but because everything finally made sense. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was upset, but because my mind would not let go of what I had seen. Numbers have a way of telling the truth when people do not. I sat at the kitchen table long after the house had gone quiet, a single lamp casting a soft circle of light over the documents spread in front of me. I went through everything again, slower this time, more carefully. The dates stretched back further than I expected. Months, then years. Small transfers at first, amounts that could easily go unnoticed if you trusted the person handling them. Then gradually, they grew. Larger withdrawals. Repeated patterns. Always timed in a way that would not raise immediate concern. I traced one line with my finger, then another, building the timeline in my mind piece by piece. It was not random. It was deliberate. That was the part that settled deepest in my chest. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. I thought about Emily as a child, how she used to sit at this very table doing her homework while I made dinner. She would ask questions about numbers, about how things worked, about why certain things mattered. I had taught her to be careful, to be responsible, to respect what you earn and what others give you. I opened my eyes again and looked down at the papers. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been replaced with something else. Something quieter. Something colder. The next morning, I made my coffee the same way I always did. 2 spoons of sugar, a splash of cream. Routine has a way of steadying the mind. I carried the mug to the table and sat down again, the folder still waiting where I had left it. I did not rush. I took a sip, then reached for my phone. There was one name I had not spoken to in a long time, but it came to me clearly now, without hesitation. Harold Bennett. He had handled a few legal matters for me years ago, back when my husband was still alive. He was precise, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. I scrolled through my contacts until I found his number and stared at it for a moment. Then I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice just as steady as I remembered. "Margaret, it has been a while." There was no surprise in his tone, just recognition. "It has," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I need to ask you something." There was a brief pause, the kind that signals attention. Of course. I did not explain everything over the phone. I did not need to. I simply asked if he had time to review some documents. He said he did. We agreed to meet that afternoon. I ended the call and set the phone down gently, my reflection faintly visible in the dark screen. I looked different somehow. Not older, just clearer. By the time I arrived at his office, the sun was high, the sky bright and open in a way that felt almost indifferent to everything else. Harold greeted me with a small nod and led me into his office. The space was exactly as I remembered. Neat, orderly, quiet. I placed the folder on his desk and opened it without a word. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. I watched him as he moved through the pages, his expression unchanged, his eyes scanning each line with careful attention. Minutes passed. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his gaze. Not surprise. Not disbelief. Confirmation. "Did you authorize these transfers?" he asked. The question was simple. Direct. I shook my head once. "No," he nodded slowly, as if that answer had already been expected. "And your daughter had access to this account?" I let out a small breath. "Yes." I trusted her. He closed the folder gently, resting his hand on top of it for a moment. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this is not a misunderstanding." I held his gaze, steady and quiet. "I know." The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not empty, not uncertain, defined. I felt something settle inside me, something that had been shifting since the moment I opened that small white box. Not anger, not sadness, just certainty. I reached forward and closed the folder myself, my fingers resting on it for a brief second longer than necessary. Then I looked back at Harold, my voice clear, measured. "Tell me what needs to be done." Harold did not rush his answer. He leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands together as if he had seen situations like this before, as if he understood that what mattered now was not just what could be done, but how it should be done. "First," he said, his voice steady, "we document everything. Every transfer, every authorization, every point of access. We build a clear timeline that cannot be questioned." I nodded once, absorbing each word carefully. He continued, explaining the steps in a way that felt methodical, almost clinical. "We would secure the accounts, remove access, freeze anything that could be moved. Then we would prepare the formal notices, the kind that carry weight not because they are loud, but because they are precise." I listened without interrupting, my hands resting calmly in my lap. There was a time when hearing something like this would have overwhelmed me, when I would have hesitated, searching for a softer path, a way to avoid conflict. But that time had passed somewhere between the quiet click of realization and this moment. "And Emily?" I asked finally, my voice even. Harold held my gaze for a brief second before answering. "You do not confront her yet," he said. "Not until everything is in place. You proceed with clarity, not emotion." I let that settle. It made sense. Emotion had already been used against me. Quiet, deliberate action would not be. When I left his office, I did not feel heavy. I felt focused. The drive home was different from the day before. The same roads, the same turns, but everything looked sharper, more defined. I noticed things I had not paid attention to in years. The way the light hit the storefront windows, the steady rhythm of traffic, the small details that exist whether you notice them or not. By the time I reached my house, I already knew what I needed to do first. Inside, the air was still, just as I had left it. I set my purse down and walked directly to the desk. The folder was still there, waiting. I opened it again, this time not as someone searching for answers, but as someone confirming what she already understood. I made a list. Dates, amounts, patterns. I wrote everything down in clear, careful handwriting, each line steady, each number precise. There was something grounding about it. Order replacing uncertainty. When I finished, I closed the notebook and sat back in my chair, looking at what I had written. It was all there now. Not scattered, not hidden, clear. I stood up and walked to the cabinet where I kept my important documents. Birth certificates, property records, old insurance papers, things I had always kept organized but rarely revisited. I pulled out another folder, one that held information about the account Emily had access to. I flipped through it slowly, checking signatures, permissions, dates of authorization. Everything aligned with what Harold had said. Access had been given, trust had been extended, and then it had been used. I closed the folder and held it for a moment, my fingers resting against the edge. There was no anger in me as I stood there, just a quiet understanding of what had been done and what needed to follow. I placed the folder back neatly, exactly where it belonged, and closed the cabinet door. The house felt the same, but I did not. I moved through the kitchen, rinsing my coffee cup, wiping down the counter, completing small tasks that had always been part of my day. Routine, again, not as avoidance, but as control. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed softly on the counter. A message from Emily. I glanced at the screen. Did you make it home okay? There was a small pause before I opened it, just long enough to notice the simplicity of the question. No mention of the gift. No mention of the day. Just a surface-level check, the kind that fills space without addressing anything real. I typed my response slowly. Yes, I did. Thank you. I read it once before sending it. Neutral. Polite. Nothing more. A few seconds later, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then another message. Glad to hear. We had such a nice time today. I looked at the words for a moment, then locked my phone and set it down without replying. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was intentional. I walked to the living room and sat down in my usual chair, folding my hands gently in my lap. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, soft and steady. I allowed myself to sit there without distraction, without filling the space with noise or thought. Just stillness. For years, I had adjusted myself to fit into spaces where I was no longer valued. I had made things smaller, quieter, easier, so others would feel comfortable. But sitting there now, I understood something I had overlooked before. I did not need to take up less space. I simply needed to stop giving it away. As the light shifted across the room, I reached for the small white box on the table beside me. I opened it one more time, looking at the bracelet inside. It had not changed. Of course it had not. But I had. I closed the lid gently and set it aside, not as something painful, but as something final. Then I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm, my thoughts clear, already moving toward what would come next. The next morning began earlier than usual. I woke before the sun had fully risen, the house still wrapped in that quiet gray light that comes just before everything sharpens into focus. For a moment, I lay there without moving, listening to the faint ticking of the clock down the hall. It felt different now. Not heavy, not empty, just still. I got out of bed and moved through my morning routine with the same care I always had. But there was something more deliberate in each action. I made the bed. I opened the curtains. I brewed my coffee. Small things, but each one grounded me. Each one a quiet reminder that I was still in control of my own space, my own life. When I sat down at the kitchen table, the folder was already there, placed neatly where I had left it the night before. I did not open it right away. Instead, I took a slow sip of coffee and looked around the room, letting my eyes settle on the familiar details. The worn edge of the countertop, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the framed photo near the window. It struck me then how much of my life had been built on consistency, on showing up, on doing the right thing even when no one noticed. And perhaps that was why it had been so easy for someone else to assume it would always be there, always available, always unquestioned. I set my cup down and reached for the folder. This time, I was not reviewing. I was preparing. I took out the documents Harold had marked and began organizing them into a new order, one that told a clear story from beginning to end. Each transfer placed in sequence. Each signature aligned with its corresponding date. There was no confusion anymore. No gaps. Just a pattern that spoke for itself. Once everything was arranged, I placed the documents into a clean envelope and sealed it carefully. The sound of the paper pressing together was soft, but final. I wrote Harold's name on the front in steady, deliberate letters and set it aside. By mid-morning, I was back in my car, the envelope resting in the passenger seat beside me. The drive to the bank felt shorter than usual, or perhaps I was simply more aware of where I was going. Inside, the air was cool, the atmosphere calm and orderly. I approached the counter and spoke with the manager, a woman I had seen many times over the years but never truly needed until now. I explained, clearly and without hesitation, that I wanted to update my account access immediately. Remove all secondary permissions. Require direct authorization for any future transactions. She listened carefully, her expression professional but attentive, and then nodded. We can take care of that right away. There were forms to sign, verifications to complete, questions to answer. I moved through each step without pause, my voice steady, my mind focused. When it was done, she handed me the confirmation papers and offered a polite smile. Everything is secure now. I returned the smile, just as polite. Thank you. Back in the car, I placed the confirmation papers neatly into my bag. One step completed, several more ahead. When I arrived home, I did not go inside right away. I sat for a moment, looking at the front door, the same one I had walked through countless times without thinking. Today, I noticed the small details. The way the paint had slightly faded near the handle. The faint creak it made when opened. It was still my home. Still mine to enter, to leave, to protect. Inside, I moved directly to the desk and placed the bank confirmation beside the sealed envelope. Everything was beginning to take shape. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Structured. Intentional. My phone buzzed again sometime in the early afternoon. This time it was a call. Emily. I watched the screen light up, her name displayed clearly, and let it ring once, twice, 3 times before I answered. Hi, Mom. Her voice came through, light and familiar. I was thinking about yesterday. I hope you liked the little bracelet. I thought it was sweet. I held the phone gently against my ear, my expression unchanged. It was thoughtful, I replied. My tone was calm, measured, exactly what she expected to hear. There was a brief pause on the other end, as if she was waiting for something more. When it did not come, she continued. We are thinking of having dinner next weekend. Just something small. You should come. I let a second pass before answering. That sounds nice. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Great. I will send you the details. The call ended shortly after. The conversation light, uncomplicated, almost normal. I placed the phone back on the table and looked at it for a moment before turning away. Normal. That was the word she was trying to preserve. The surface. The appearance. But beneath that, everything had already changed. I walked to the living room and sat down, my hands resting calmly in my lap. The afternoon light stretched across the floor, slow and steady. I allowed myself to sit in that quiet again, not as someone waiting, but as someone preparing. The next step would not be loud. It would not be dramatic, but it would be undeniable. And for the first time in a long time, I was not reacting to what had been done to me. I was deciding what would happen next. Saturday arrived with a quiet kind of certainty. I did not rush the morning. I took my time choosing what to wear, settling on something simple but precise, a cream blouse and a tailored jacket that fit just right. Not for them, but for myself. Presentation matters, not because it changes what is true, but because it reflects how firmly you stand in it. As I stood in front of the mirror, I adjusted the collar slightly and studied my reflection. There was no hesitation there anymore, just calm. When I arrived at Emily's house, the driveway was already full. Cars lined neatly along the curb, voices drifting out through the open windows. Laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. It was the kind of gathering I had attended many times before, the kind where everything appeared warm, effortless, complete. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment with my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Then I reached for my bag, making sure everything inside was exactly where it needed to be. The envelope, the copies, the confirmations, nothing out of place. When I stepped out of the car, the afternoon sun was bright, almost too bright, casting sharp shadows along the walkway. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. It opened quickly. Emily stood there, smiling, her expression bright and welcoming, as if nothing had shifted at all. "Mom, you made it," she said, leaning in for a light embrace. I returned it, measured and brief. Of course. Inside, the house was filled with people. Daniel greeted me with a polite nod. Patricia was seated near the center of the room, her hand lifted just enough to ensure the ring caught the light again, drawing quiet admiration from those nearby. The same scene, repeating itself. I took it in without reaction, my expression composed, my movements unhurried. "Can I get you something to drink?" Emily asked, already turning toward the kitchen. "Water is fine," I replied. She nodded and disappeared into the other room. I moved toward a chair near the edge of the gathering and sat down, placing my bag gently beside me. Conversations flowed around me, light and easy, but I did not try to follow them. Instead, I observed the way Emily moved from guest to guest, attentive, polished. The way Patricia accepted each compliment with practiced ease. The way no one questioned anything because, on the surface, everything looked exactly as it should. When Emily returned, she handed me a glass and sat briefly beside me. "I am glad you came," she said, her tone soft, almost careful. I nodded once. "So am I." There was a pause, small but noticeable. Then she smiled again and stood, drawn back into the center of the room. I let the moment pass without filling it. Time moved forward in quiet increments. Conversations rose and fell. Plates were passed. Laughter echoed. And all the while, I waited. Not impatiently, not nervously, just with purpose. When the room had settled into a steady rhythm, when everyone was comfortable, relaxed, certain of their place, I reached down and picked up my bag. The movement was small, but deliberate. I stood slowly, smoothing my jacket as I did. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but clear enough to carry across the room. The conversation softened, not completely stopping, but enough to shift attention. She turned toward me, her smile still in place. "Yes." I took a step forward, closing the distance just enough to be seen, to be heard without raising my voice. "Before we continue, there is something I would like to address." The room grew quieter now, the subtle shift of awareness settling over the group. Emily's smile faltered, just slightly, the first crack in an otherwise perfect surface. "Mom, what is it?" I did not answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my bag and removed the envelope, holding it lightly in my hand. Not as a weapon, not as a threat, simply as truth, contained and ready. I looked at her, steady and composed, my voice even when I spoke again. "I believe it is time we talked about something that has been overlooked for quite some time." The silence that followed was different from any that had come before. Not empty, not uncertain, expectant. And for the first time since I stepped into that house, every eye in the room was on me, not out of politeness, but because they understood, even without knowing the details, that something had shifted in a way that could not be ignored. Emily looked at the envelope in my hand, then back at my face, searching for something familiar, something she could recognize and control. "Mom, what is this about?" she asked, her voice lighter than it should have been, as if she could keep the moment from settling by refusing to give it weight. I did not raise my voice. I did not step closer. I simply held her gaze and spoke the truth the way it was meant to be spoken, without decoration. "It is about the account you have had access to for the past several years." A ripple moved through the room, subtle but undeniable. People shifted slightly in their seats. Daniel straightened. Patricia's hand, the one with the diamond ring, lowered just a fraction. Emily blinked once, then laughed softly, a quick sound meant to dissolve tension. "I do not understand what you mean," she said. I nodded once, acknowledging the response without reacting to it. "You had access," I continued, "because I trusted you. I did not monitor it. I did not question it. I believed that what was mine was safe in your hands." I let the words settle, not rushing to fill the silence that followed. Then I opened the envelope and removed the documents, holding them carefully, not as evidence to accuse, but as clarity to present. Over time, there have been transfers. Small at first, then larger, consistent, patterned. Emily's smile faded now, slowly, as if it could not hold its shape under the weight of something real. Mom, I think you are mistaken, she said, her tone tightening just enough to reveal the strain beneath it. There must be some kind of confusion. I shook my head gently. There is no confusion. I stepped forward just enough to place the papers on the table in front of her, aligning them neatly with the edge as if the order itself mattered. Every transaction is documented. Every date, every amount, reviewed, verified. The room was silent now. Not uncomfortable, not chaotic, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when something undeniable has entered the space. Emily looked down at the papers but did not touch them. Her hands remained at her sides, fingers slightly curled, as if she was deciding whether to engage or retreat. Why are you doing this here? She asked quietly, her voice lower now, more controlled. I met her gaze again, steady and calm. Because this is where it has been displayed, I replied. In front of everyone. Value. Priority. Choice. I let my eyes move briefly across the room, not accusing anyone, just acknowledging their presence. I thought it was appropriate that clarity be shared the same way. Daniel stepped forward then, his expression careful, measured. Margaret, maybe we should talk about this privately, he suggested. I turned my head slightly toward him, acknowledging his attempt without accepting it. There has been ample time for private conversations, I said. This is not about creating a scene. It is about ending a pattern. Emily's breathing had changed now, subtle but noticeable. She finally reached for the papers, her fingers brushing the edges as she lifted them slightly. Her eyes moved across the lines, scanning quickly at first, then slower as recognition replaced denial. These are just transfers, she said, but the confidence was no longer there. I used the account sometimes, but it was for things we needed. For the house. For expenses. I was going to tell you. I listened without interrupting, my expression unchanged. When she finished, I nodded once, acknowledging the explanation for what it was. You had the opportunity to tell me, I said. Many times. My voice remained even, without accusation, without anger. You chose not to. The words did not need force. Their weight came from their simplicity. Emily looked up at me then, really looked this time, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Not as someone who would adjust, who would overlook, who would remain quiet, but as someone who had stopped accepting what was being given. What do you want? She asked finally, the question direct, stripped of pretense. I held her gaze, steady and composed, the answer already clear long before she asked it. I want what should never have been taken, I said, and I want it returned with the same consistency it was removed. The room remained silent, every person present aware that something had shifted beyond repair. I did not raise my voice. I did not move closer. I simply stood there, calm and certain, allowing the truth to exist in the open, exactly where it belonged. Emily's fingers tightened around the papers, the edges bending slightly under the pressure. For a moment, she said nothing. The room held its breath with her, waiting to see which version of her would respond. The one who smiled and redirected, or the one who had finally run out of space to hide. You are making this sound worse than it is, she said at last, her voice controlled but no longer smooth. I did not take anything. I just used what was available. It was for the family. I tilted my head slightly, not in disagreement, but in quiet acknowledgement of the words she chose. For the family, I repeated softly. That is an interesting phrase. I let a brief silence follow, just enough for the weight of it to settle. Then I continued, my tone unchanged. Tell me, Emily, when you chose a $20,000 ring for Patricia, was that also for the family? A subtle shift moved through the room again. Patricia straightened in her seat, her lips pressing together, the diamond no longer quite as effortless in the light. Emily's eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. That is different, she said quickly. That was a gift. I nodded once. Yes, I said. It was. I took a small step closer, not to close distance, but to bring clarity. And the bracelet? I asked. Was that also for the family? No one spoke. No one moved. The question did not need emphasis. It stood on its own. Emily's jaw tightened slightly. You are twisting things, she replied. It is not about money. It is about thought. I held her gaze, steady and calm. You are right, I said. It is about thought. I let that sit between us, unchallenged. Then I gestured lightly toward the papers in her hand. And these choices required thought as well. Repeatedly, Daniel shifted beside her, his posture no longer as composed as before. "Emily," he said quietly, "maybe we should listen." She did not respond to him. Her eyes remained fixed on me, searching again, but this time not for control, for footing. "What are you trying to do?" she asked, her voice lower now, stripped of the earlier performance. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "Embarrassment is what happens when truth is unexpected. This is not unexpected. This is overdue." The words landed without force, but they did not need any. Around us, the room remained silent. Every person now fully aware that what they were witnessing was not a misunderstanding, not a family disagreement, but a correction. Emily looked down at the papers again, her eyes moving more slowly this time, tracing the lines she could no longer dismiss. "I was going to fix it," she said, almost quietly. "I just needed time." I listened, then nodded once. "Time was something you had," I replied. "Transparency was something you chose not to use." She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders no longer hidden. For the first time since I had arrived, she looked uncertain. Not defensive, not dismissive, just unsure. I reached into my bag once more and removed a second set of documents, placing them carefully on the table beside the first. "The account access has been revoked," I said. "Effective immediately. All future transactions require direct authorization." Her eyes moved to the new papers, then back to me. "You did that?" she asked. I met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes." A longer silence followed, one that stretched just enough to reveal what could no longer be avoided. "And the amount?" she asked finally. "What do you expect me to do?" I answered without pause. "Return it," I said. "In full. Structured. Documented. Within a timeline that reflects the consistency with which it was taken." My voice remained even, but there was no room for interpretation. No space left for negotiation of what was right. Emily's grip on the papers loosened slightly, her fingers no longer pressing, just holding. Daniel looked between us, then at the documents, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. Patricia said nothing. The room remained still. I let the moment exist exactly as it was, without rushing to fill it, without softening its edges. Because this was not a moment that needed comfort. It needed clarity. After a few seconds, I reached forward and gently adjusted the papers on the table, aligning them once more, not because they had moved much, but because precision matters, even in small things. Then I looked back at Emily, my expression calm, my posture unchanged. "This is not a punishment," I said. "It is a correction." And for the first time since I began speaking, there was nothing left in the room that could be misunderstood. Emily did not answer right away. She stood there, the papers still in her hands, her eyes moving between the numbers and the quiet faces surrounding her. The room no longer felt like a gathering. It felt like a space where something had been revealed that could not be folded back into polite conversation. Daniel took a slow breath beside her, his voice measured when he finally spoke. "Emily," he said, "we need to take this seriously." There was no accusation in his tone, only a quiet recognition of what was already clear. Emily swallowed, her composure no longer as seamless as before. "I said I would fix it," she replied, but this time her voice carried less certainty, more awareness. I watched her without interrupting, giving her the space to stand in what she had said. "Then you will," I answered simply. "Not because I am asking you to, because it is what should be done." The distinction settled between us, firm and unshaken. Patricia shifted slightly in her seat, her earlier confidence replaced with something more reserved. She adjusted the ring on her finger, but the gesture no longer drew attention. No one was looking at the diamond anymore. They were looking at something far less polished, far more real. Emily exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering as if the effort of holding everything together had finally become too much to maintain. "Okay," she said at last, the word quiet but clear. "I understand." I nodded once, not in approval, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. Understanding was not the end. It was simply the beginning of correction. The room remained still for a few moments longer. Then someone shifted, another person cleared their throat, and slowly, almost cautiously, the sounds of movement returned. But they were different now. Softer, more aware. I reached down and picked up my bag, placing the remaining documents inside with the same care I had shown from the beginning. There was nothing more to explain, nothing more to present. Everything that needed to be said had already been placed where it could not be ignored. Emily looked at me again, this time without the earlier confidence, without the practiced ease. "Mom," she said, her voice hesitant, searching for something that had not yet been defined. I met her gaze, steady and calm. "Yes." She paused, as if weighing what to say, then let the words fall away. "I will take care of it," she said instead. I held her eyes for a brief moment, then nodded. "I know you will." Not because I believed in promises spoken under pressure, but because the structure was already in place. The path forward was no longer optional. I turned then, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a simple shift of direction. I walked toward the door the same way I had entered, measured, composed, each step steady. No one stopped me. No one needed to. At the doorway, I paused just long enough to place my hand on the handle, feeling the cool surface beneath my fingers. Behind me, the room was quiet again, but not with confusion this time, with understanding. I opened the door and stepped outside, the late afternoon light stretching across the walkway, warm and clear. The air felt different, not lighter, just honest. I walked to my car, opened the door, and sat down, placing my bag carefully on the seat beside me. For a moment, I did nothing. I simply sat there, looking ahead, letting the stillness settle. There was no rush to fill it. No need to move too quickly away from what had just happened. Because for the first time in a very long time, I was not leaving something behind. I was taking something back. I started the engine and pulled away slowly, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Not erased, not forgotten, just placed where it belonged. As I drove, I thought briefly of the small white box still sitting on my table at home. The bracelet inside. It had not changed. It never would. But its meaning had. It was no longer a symbol of what I lacked. It was a reminder of what I had allowed and what I would no longer accept. When I reached my driveway, I turned off the engine and sat for a moment longer, the quiet surrounding me once again. Then I stepped out, walked to the front door, and let myself in. The house welcomed me the same way it always had. Steady, unchanged, mine. I set my bag down, moved through the familiar space, and paused at the table where the white box rested. I picked it up, opened it, and looked at the bracelet one last time. Then I closed the lid gently and set it aside, not with anger, not with regret, but with clarity. Some things are not meant to be kept. Some things are meant to be understood. I turned away from the table and walked into the next room, my steps quiet but certain, my posture unchanged. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to explain, only the simple, steady act of moving forward, exactly as I chose.